The spiritual successor is a concept in video games and media that I think is underappreciated. Some titles have such a specific vibe or set of mechanics that you can't find anywhere else. And when the franchise sequel machines stop ticking, this is when they really succeed. For instance, Metal Gear Solid. The Hideo Kojima and Konami brand of stealth action games is something that's so unique that no one else has really recreated that. At least not until Kojima himself releases Fizzant, which is apparently 5 to 6 years away, meaning we'll all be old to Snake by the time it's out.
So yo, it's Austin, and today we're gonna be getting into these spiritual successors and sequels that have been floating around video games for decades. There's plenty of cool successors to talk about today, but before we get started, thanks to Opera GX for sponsoring this video. What internet browser do you use? Well, you should be using Opera GX, the highly customizable browser built specifically for gamers. Most browsers try to be a one-size-fits-all type of deal, but Opera GX gives you a specific set of tools that are perfect for people who use it a lot for gaming. And recently they've had a facelift with a lot of UI changes. You can really see how much cleaner it looks to the older version. The sidebars have transparency, and the mods interface is super easy to navigate. You'll be able to have the experience you want, complete with sound effects and music for some. The built-in GX Corner serves as a great way to keep track of gaming news, sales on the horizon, as well as upcoming releases, and I've used it several times to find a new indie. Speaking of mods, the GX store has a bunch available for free, and the ability to mix and match elements of all of them so you can get the right vibe for your needs. There's a ton of official and user-submitted ones. I myself like Cyberdeck, because I mean, yeah, look at it. Opera GX is really easy to download, and once you do, it has a very super quick old browser import feature, so you'll be able to bring in your preferred settings in a jiffy and get to using the internet like usual. Just with, you know, like some cool tools on the GX control panel, like RAM and CPU limiting, so you can really control your experience. So if you want to swap over or come back to Opera GX, click the link down in the description to get it downloaded today. I've actually been using it for a hot minute and it's hard to beat. Click the link in the description to download Opera GX today. Thanks to Opera GX for the sponsor, but for now, we gotta get back to the big show. So like I was saying, video game mechanics. Spiritual successors can happen for any number of reasons. Developer wants to recreate a concept without the old publisher, like with Demon Souls to Dark Souls. A new dev bands together to make something invoking their previous work, like with Rare and Platonic Games, or some indie developer screaming, "Screw it, I'll do it myself," giving a Shovel Knight or One Step from Eden. Because if Capcom's not gonna make a Mega Man Battle Network, someone's gotta. That love for a particular set of game mechanics goes a long way. Like, I don't necessarily need another Star Fox or Suikoden, I just want games that do those things. I need more 3D rail shooters, more JRPGs with base building and a ridiculously large cast. Which is why I love that games like Euden Chronicle, 100 Heroes, and EX-Zodiac exist. Shoutouts to the Kickstarters, early accesses, and indies that let me step into those familiar shoes. For a while there, you would see a ton of these spiritual successors pop up on Kickstarter. Kickstarter was a huge part of resurrecting old game genres in the early 2010s. I feel like it has less impact these days as crowdfunding has largely shifted to the early access model, and there's been a whole bunch of abandoned projects, like Project Phoenix. Where'd you go? Others have a hard time getting published and get infinitely delayed, like Armed Fantasia and Penny Blood, both spiritual successors to Wild Arms and Shadow Hearts. It's like a flip of the coin. But when these were popping off, like with Double Fine Adventure raising over $3 million for a new adventure game, Shadowrun Returns getting close to 2 mil, Shovel Knight swinging in with 300K with the Mega Man spirit, and of course, numbers just got higher. The most high profile of which has to be Bloodstained Ritual of the Night.
納得がない。このビジョンを実現するには君たちの協力が必要なんだ。
Igavania, Metroidvania, side-scrolling 2D action RPGs, whatever you want to call them, are a super saturated genre. Heck, it's one of the most popular categories and tags on Steam, and you can get these in any flavor you want. Cute and wholesome, a roguelike, a spin-off of Love Live, Record of Lotus War, a rogue? But there's only one Bloodstained. Legendary developer Koji Igarashi left Konami in 2014 and decided to launch a Kickstarter for Bloodstained, which quickly became the highest funded video game Kickstarter Kickstarter, until Shenmue 3 passed it up the next month. Obviously a spiritual successor to Castlevania Symphony of the Night, Bloodstained was his new studio Artplay's attempt at giving us more of that. And while it's hard to argue with the results, even if the stretch goals took them all the way till 2024 to finish, props to them for actually doing it. Bloodstained is a great game with a ton of content in it. In Castlevania fashion, you explore Big Castle as Miriam, where you absorb abilities from enemies, get different weapons to slap things around with, and put on silly hats. Considering Konami's incapable of releasing anything with the name Castlevania on it that isn't Marble of Souls or a remaster collection, this filled that gap nicely. But this is just one of the Kickstarter successes. Let's use the term success lightly here though, because Mighty No. 9 was also technically a success, despite being Mighty No. 9.
And make the bad guys cry like an anime fan on prom night.
Previously mentioned Eiyuden Chronicle 100 Heroes was the first and only spiritual successor to Suikoden. It was spearheaded by that franchise's original lead developer too, the late Yoshitaka Murayama, who would unfortunately pass away a tiny bit prior to its release, but I think he would have been happy to see its reception. I made it about 30 hours in before game ADHDing into something else, but it's on my list to tackle again now that the DLC's out. And if you like your RPGs with more of a C or W flavor, Pillars of Eternity and Torment Tides of Numenera fared well for themselves too. Invoking Baldur's Gate, Icewind Dale, and Planescape Torment respectively, Obsidian and In Exile proved that there was a demand for these type of games, making way for the massive successes of today like Baldur's Gate 3.
The upcoming Patapon spiritual successor, Redoutan's looking pretty alright.
A game that obviously probably wasn't going to see a sequel without some kind of wild fan support. I assume that this Kickstarter's popularity, with its 219 million yen raised, also led to the recent Patapon 1 and 2 replay, so hey, I guess if Sony won't do it, Bandai Namco and Retata Arts will make something happen. Early access win? But of course, there's one major game I haven't mentioned, and I'd be remiss not to bring up Yooka-Laylee, a Kickstarter that launched a mere week after Bloodstained, which is really close. Yooka-Laylee by Playtonic Games is the throwback spiritual successor to a type of 3D platformer that wasn't really being made anymore, specifically the Banjo-Kazooies and Donkey Kong 64s. Big old chunky collectathons with massive environments starring two cartoony scrimbly bimblies and at least 4 hours of blah 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 blah. The hype was real for this one. The campaign was a big old success, earning over £2 million. This nostalgic ride finally comes out in 2017 with mixed to decent reviews as people realize that there's a lot of dated aspects about it. I think Playtonic nailed the vibe they wanted, but a lot of the pacing and gameplay elements felt a little too Nintendo 64. Probably hence why they're working on the remake, the unfortunately named Yooka-Laylee. Just rolls off the tongue, huh? Honestly, I think if they trim some fat and tighten things up, I think it'll be great. But this isn't actually what I want to talk about here. You know what's cooler than Banjo-Kazooie? Donkey Kong Country.
I'd shower you with coconut cream pie.
No, not that one. This one. Rareware's 2D Donkey Kong romps are awesome games, no notes. Late 2019, Playtonic surprised audiences by announcing another Yooka-Laylee, but this time in the style of the Donk. Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Lair. And I like this one so much more. It got rid of the big open hub worlds with the need to do random quizzes to progress, and just focused on platforming, rolling around and jumping on dudes' heads. Maybe a little tongue action for the Chameleon Twist fans out there. Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Lair is the type of game I want to see more of, and Playtonic did a great job. Certain chapters have multiple ways to play them, and you can alter their layouts with the elements. The whole shtick of this game is going through the levels to gain enough bees, which function as shields to tackle the final stage, the Impossible Lair. The collectibles are left to a manageable amount and placed in attainable areas. Looking at you, Yuka 1. Great placement, y'all. The visuals look solid, the worlds are colorful and have nice clarity. The soundtrack is, as you would expect, a perfect recreation of that style. The gameplay starts simple but gets pretty tough. Not quite DKC 3 hard, but still. And when I think of spiritual successors for Donkey Kong Country, nothing else even comes close. Impossible Lair is polished to all heck, usually goes on sale for cheap, and even if you didn't like the original, like me, this spin-off is worth your time. Now, if someone wants to summon up Kickstarter bucks with Breath of Fire vibes, let me know. Maybe its success will force Capcom to release an HD collection too, because that's how these things have been going. That is, unless your name is Red Ash.
Yo, where's that anime? So how's about when the spiritual successor comes from within? There's several cases of video games being made whenever an IP or franchise ends, and people want to still do the same thing with those same mechanics. Same devs, new idea, one of the most obvious cases being Bioshock. The spiritual successor of System Shock 1 and 2, of course. Irrational Games and prior Looking Glass Technologies put out a series of first-person semi-RPG survival horror games leaning into a non-linear emergent gameplay system. You'll navigate it like an FPS while clicking on the screen and HUD for multiple elements. The second's more of a shooter. To call these cult classics would be an understatement. System Shock 2 in particular is one of the most celebrated video games of all time. However, Electronic Arts owned the rights to the System Shock franchise, so when it came time for Irrational to make another project, it was Freedom Force. A few other things. And then in 2007, when they were rebranded to 2K Boston, we'd get the generation-defining Bioshock. There's not much I can say about Bioshock that others or myself haven't already, but once you actually sit down to play System Shock 2, you can see the influence bleeding all over it. The sci-fi horror elements, the complicated and often puzzle-based level design, the sheer amount of environmental storytelling, and of course, the oppressive, almost faceless figures staring you down the entire time. Though I don't think Atlas is as terrifying as Shodan's PNG wall of horror.
Remember that it is my will that guided you here.
Is Yakuza a spiritual successor to Shenmue? I see a lot of convincing arguments for both sides, as there's a lot of similarities between Yakuza and Shenmue. They're both semi-open world, have an element of mystery, lots of bizarre mini-games to consume your time, and are very narrative heavy. However, Yakuza and its sequels lean more into the beat-em-up side of things, while Shenmue spends a lot of time wasting, well, time.
Please give me 100 yen.
You're always saying that.
You've got things to do on a daily basis, people to track down, story beats to chase that require a smidge more effort than showing up to a map marker. If you ask me, this is more of a natural progression. I feel similarly about Capcom's Maximo and Army of Zen on the PlayStation 2, both lauded as spiritual successors to Ghosts and Goblins, and to be fair, they do share a lot of the same DNA. Brutal difficulty, there are indeed ghosts and goblins to fight, and anytime you get hit, you strip down. Though to be honest, you can also say the same for Fawcett Amore for the PC Engine CD. Speaking of Capcom, anyone played Tech Romancer? What happens when you take every Japanese anime mecha trope and put it into a fighting game? You get a game that they refuse to put in any of their collections recently. Some people consider this a spiritual successor or sequel to a previous release, Cyberbot's Full Metal Madness, which is an awesome name. Capcom was making new stuff all the time back then, and the only real similarities are the fact that they're fighting games with mech robots, and Cyberbot's mainstay Jin makes an appearance as a hidden character. However, I suppose if you want some big mecha fighting game action, this would be the proper successor from Capcom. For real though, Tech Romancer's awesome. Those are kinda iffy. On the other hand, if you look at Perfect Dark and Goldeneye 007 on the Nintendo 64, that is definitely a spiritual successor. It really can't be overstated just how good Rareware was in the 90s and 2000s. Between 98 and 2001, we got Banjo 1 and 2, Donkey Kong 64, Jet Force Gemini, Mickey Speedway USA, which is really good, Conker's Bad Fur Day, and of course their next attempt at a first-person shooter, Perfect Dark. I'm still thinking about replaying Jet Force Gemini. Comes to my brain like every 3 or 4 years. Also, I guess Tamarin counts as a spiritual successor to that, even if it really sucks. Perfect Dark was Rare wanting to evolve their ideas from Goldeneye, considering Electronic Arts, back again by the way, snagged up the publishing rights shortly after, and what we got is probably one of their best games. Rather than James Bond, you're Joanna Dark, a badass agent from the Carrington Institute, definitely totally unrelated to MI6, and you go from mission to mission, meeting characters, tackling different difficulties of objectives, and even potentially doing it all in co-op. Rated M for mature, because this was the most violent thing ever.
Oh my god.
Perfect Dark ran a little choppy on the Nintendo 64, even with the expansion pack, because the Nintendo 64 was really showing its chunk in a post-Dreamcast world. So I'm thankful Rare ported this to the Xbox 360 and later Rare Replay, even if they went a little hard on the bloom.
I'm blind the whole goddamn time.
Goldeneye 007 is a solid console first-person shooter in an era where a lot of those were difficult to pull off, to say the least. Its multiplayer was the focal point of a lot of kids' activities in the late 90s, and Perfect Dark took that to the next level. More weapons, more levels, some repeats, bots. It's hard to remember the time when offline multiplayer bots were a novelty and not the norm. When it comes to the concept of like the same studio pulling out a nearly perfect spiritual successor, I don't think there's many that could top Perfect Dark and Bioshock. Unless you're, you know, Dark Souls from Demon Souls, Shadow of the Colossus from Eco, The Outer Worlds from Fallout New Vegas, Solo Torobo from Tail Concerto.
This might cheer you up. I don't want it. Okay then.
Well, if you insist, then I guess I'll have to take it.
It's not always gonna be from big developers though. Nowadays we're seeing more non-AAA and non-Kickstarter takes come out on Steam because you know what? If they're not gonna do it, f it, I'll do it. Not me though. I messed around on RPG Maker XP once and that was terrible. Pizza Tower is a 2023 indie by Torta Pizza that looked at Wario Land 4, said they should really make more of these, slapped on a bizarre Nickelodeon aesthetic and an awesome soundtrack invoking the Sega Genesis, and what we got is a game I wish I played sooner. Wario Land 4 is a cool, almost one-of-a-kind platformer from Nintendo. It amped up the speeds of previous Wario Land titles, has him charging through walls using his head and elbows through several levels, several transformations, and is one of those games that I'm so glad hit Nintendo Switch Online. Still not sure how tough Enough made it. Pizza Tower is a game you either love or hate, mostly because I asked a few friends if they played it and their answers were either it's so good or I hate looking at it, which can also tell you who's a Sega kid at heart. You control one Chef Peppino Spaghetti who has to scale up this tower in order to stop his own shop from being destroyed. You run through different levels, collecting ingredients, hidden collectibles, and then smash the pillar at the end, turn around, make it out before Pizza Face catches you. An absurd premise, I know, but feel free to take a little extra time to listen to the tunes. What you see on the screen is what you get. Challenging trial and error level design meant for replaying, fun boss fights that make creative use of the mechanics, and a goofy, lighthearted theme that I can only describe as something that was made specifically for me. Is it perfect? No. But also, yes? Wario Land 4 is one of those Nintendo classics you want someone to continue making. Shake It wasn't quite there, but Pizza Tower takes that concept and quite literally runs with it. Also similarly, Anton Blast, although this is more of a standard platformer. Either way, Wario certainly makes a lot more sense than, say, someone wanting to make a spiritual successor to The Legend of Zelda: The Faces of Evil.
You must be hardened with fire! Go and kill!
But hey, I guess people did anyways. Arzette, the Jewel of Faramore. When I first heard someone was making a game in the style of two of the worst video games of all time, my first question was why, followed up with why slightly louder? Which of course means it would join Daredevil 2003 as a piece of media that released on my birthday. However, Arzette takes its stinky inspiration and makes something quite a bit better. Turns out if you fix up the jank, speed up the pace a little bit, and add a smidge of conveyance, CDI Zelda becomes a decent take on Wonder Boy in Monster World. Just also keeping the same tone and cutscenes you would expect.
Howdy there, stranger. I take it you're on a quest.
Right. Apologies for the hole.
Oh, no worries about that.
That was definitely recorded from like 5 feet away. Arzette, the Jewel of Faramore, spends a lot of time trying to do the goofy MS Paint looking cutscenes to a point where it does lose a little bit of the earnest weirdness that the CDI releases have. It's trying hard to make the YouTube poop energy happen, and while some bits are entertaining, it's impossible to replicate that.
You've killed me!
Good.
The gameplay's decent at least. There's still a lot of random backtracking with gated items to unlock, some of which feels like a slog, but it's definitely better than the source material. But still, the question remains, who wanted this? Well, whoever they were, they got it.
All right! Avalanche! See you around, kiddo!
Similarly, who out there wanted a spiritual successor to Action 52? If you played last year's UFO 50, then yeah, that's probably you. The style of X amount of games in one on some NES cartridge has been around for a while, made mostly famous by Supreme Shovelware Action 52, and a bunch of indie developers band together to make UFO 50 with a thesis of, what if these didn't suck? Most games range from decent to great. There's a meta-narrative talking about the studio over the course of its lifetime, and it's one of those fantastic releases that everyone should try. Mostly Bushido Ball. 8-bit Windjammers, yeah, I'm sold. Bomb Rush Cyberfunk by Team Reptile, the people who brought us the super good Lethal League, is exactly what it looks like.
Jet Set Radio!
Sega's Jet Set Radio duology, plus the one Game Boy Advance title, is a series of games that can't seem to escape from its early 2000s containment. At least until recently. Sega ages when you skate around doing tricks, spraying graffiti to fight for territory against rival gangs, all while dodging the police. It's got an aesthetic unlike any other, a fantastic soundtrack spearheaded by Hideki Naganuma. It's also been left, like most of Sega's franchises, in the dust, mostly popping up for a cameo here or there. Beaten Monkey Ball, Sega Heroes, that's what you're getting. So Bomb Rush Cyberfunk went, yeah, okay, let's do that. And it is exactly what they made. Slight old school jank and all. The combat leaves a bit to be desired, but I like the overall vibe of the world. They even brought Naganuma in for a few tracks. If you're wanting to wall ride, do some flips, and spray graffiti all over the place, and don't mind it being, for a lack of a better word, Jet Set clone, Bomb Rush is great. Bug Fables: The Everlasting Sapling is a take on Paper Mario starring a bunch of bugs. You know exactly what you're looking at the second you see any combat, and it's a cute, pleasant experience through and through. The previously mentioned One Step from Eden is a fantastic roguelike take on Mega Man Battle Network using that same grid system, and even that has a sequel purely meant for 1v1 online play, Duelists from Eden. I can barely keep track of my own attacks as I'm playing, let alone against another. And speaking of Battle Network, I'm gonna need Berserk Bits to hurry up and come out so I can leave it running on my desktop all day, every day. I'm also need EX-Zodiac to hurry its butt out of early access at a good pace. I can wait a bit longer. You know what rules? Old school Star Fox. Sure, it's a rail shooter, but honestly, they aren't making much of these anymore either. EX-Zodiac is a low-poly styled 3D rail shooter starring that Super FX chip aesthetic that takes elements from Fox McCloud and Space Harrier. It's not necessarily the type of game that would appeal to mainstream audiences in 2025, but it does feel like a smoother version of those classic releases. The soundtrack rips, the level designs are all memorable, the UI and character animations are on point. It's gotten a new stage via update as recently as April this year, and I'm hoping to see it finished before too long, as it's been in early access for 3 years now. Go give them a little up if you can. If you like Star Fox at all, you will enjoy this. And one last indie for now, and it's time for the solo dev. This here's Pumpkin Jack, and I think he falls right in the middle of being a spiritual successor for Medieval and Jak and Daxter. At a first glance, Pumpkin Jack takes on the world and style of the PlayStation 1 classics. Jak is some Halloween-inspired guy, and he's got a few weapons like a shovel and a spear. It's got a goofy tone, and he'd fit right into the world with Sir Danielson Wigginbottom Fortesque IV. Heck, you can put them side by side. That's a team-up crossover for the ages. The actual gameplay more closely resembles Jak and Daxter, with a lot of platforming, double jumping, defeating waves of enemies in combat, and the occasional variety section, like a minecart or a horse. Medieval is way more grounded and slower paced, so it feels right at home between those two. You can clearly tell what inspiration the developer Nicolas Missonnier had when making this. And speaking of, that's a lot of game for a single person, with Nicolas doing most of the work outside of music and console ports. Pumpkin Jack is a really cool game that can be beaten in an afternoon, so it's one of those indies you can pick up on sale and have a great time for less than the cost of lunch. The dialogue is entertaining enough, the gameplay feels right at home with your PlayStation 2 action platformers, and you can tell whatever vision was had was executed perfectly. Which makes a lot of sense considering his next video game would be a spiritual successor to Ratchet & Clank, a Kimbot.
Oh, why can't it ever be a regular beach?
Yeah, that one's a bit more obvious. I'll check this one out another time because I sure do love me some Ratchet & Clank.
You know,
Which brings us to our next category, the forgotten successor. Games that may or may not have gone by the wayside over the years, because I don't think there's a chance in heck that anyone in 2025 is talking about Gubble. Gubble. What, you haven't played Gubble? Any gubheads in chat? Gubble is a disgusting freak with 2 massive gauges on the sides of his head, who picks up various tools to unscrew things from the environment in order to move to the next stage. This was released in 1997, with it coming to the PlayStation 1 all the way in 2002 in the States, and there's probably like 3 people tops who recognize what this is a spiritual successor of. Gubble was created by Actual Entertainment, a funny name for a studio who has only created Gubble that was co-founded by Franz Lozinger, the guy who made Crystal Castles. There we go, mystery solved. Although I'm gonna say I prefer Bentley Bear to f***ing Gubble. I suppose that's more of a spiritual sequel, kind of like how Fountain of Dreams was that for Wasteland, aka Wasteland or Fallout in Florida, just with killer clowns. This is a setting you don't see very often. Basically, Electronic Arts, you keep coming up, wanted to make a sequel to Wasteland, didn't want to work with the original developer Interplay, and put out something that reviews weren't too kind towards. Later on, EA would deny that Fountain of Dreams had any connection to Wasteland, which would be considered a dub for Wasteland fans. Just your, you know, average corporate nonsense, which is probably how Osman Cannon Dancer was made. Tell me when you see the resemblance. Yep, that's Strider. Took me a single jump. Osman Cannon Dancer is a game I think was made out of spite. Helmed by ex-Capcom designer Koichi Yatsui, Osman is so close you might want to call it a Strider clone. Developed by Mitchell Corporation for arcades with a lot of ex-Capcom staff, Osman tells the story of a Osman being summoned to take on a new evil sorceress, Abdullah the Slaver, paid for by some dude named Jack Lazon. The whole plot is really off the walls and has Osman running from stage to stage, fighting a series of targets assigned by the government before they betray you. Then you chase him down to find him, Abdullah murders him, then you ascend to the most evil looking heavens I've ever seen, taking down God aka Slaver and becoming the one god yourself. Supposedly the story's mocking Yotsui's time at Capcom after creating Strider, but hey, we got a pretty killer game out of it. Just make sure you bring enough quarters because this thing is insanely difficult. Y'all like Deus Ex? How about a rebranded Deus Ex sequel? A vast majority of these got canceled or repurposed, but Deus Ex Clan Wars by Crystal Dynamics got shifted into its own release, Project Snowblind. They basically yoinked out all the role-playing elements and instead focused on the cybertech aspects of Deus Ex. You play as Nathan Frost, and he's all souped up with the latest nanotech augments. You can slow down time to shimmy through bullets, put up a big shield to protect yourself, and more as it goes on. We got hacking with the ice pick, and a lot of things that are Deus Ex adjacent, but you can clearly see the steps taken to be a decent successor to that. However, as it's purely combat focused, it only really took aim at the mechanics in the world. It's not quite Deus Ex, but a fun game nonetheless, especially as a PS2 shooter. Which brings me to one more forgotten successor, and something that I literally forgot about until my editor reminded me, Bodycount. You ever heard of Bodycount? No, not Ice-T's metal band. That's come up twice this year for some reason. I'm talking about the spiritual successor to Criterion and EA's Black. They just, you know, totally screwed it up. Black was a really cool game for the time. Criterion were hot on the heels of the amazing releases of Burnout 3 Takedown and Revenge hitting the next generation and letting people cause mass, really detailed destruction with cars. So with Black, they wanted to do the same thing for first-person shooters, and I think despite it being stuck to the Xbox and PlayStation 2, they did a pretty solid job. It's relatively straightforward, the plot's generic, featuring a bunch of real footage and people talking about ops and missions. I don't think anyone out there is given Black points for originality, but that doesn't matter when you can blow down doors with a shotgun. But negative points for the lamest grenade throw I've seen in a hot minute. Black reviewed well enough, sold a decent amount of copies, and has a legacy for pushing mechanical boundaries. However, any attempts at a sequel were unable to get off the ground. Fast forward a few years, a number of staff from Criterion would join up with Codemasters, and eventually we'd see Bodycount. Basically advertised as the spiritual successor to Black, it's even in the characters' names. Black's protagonist was Jack Keller, Bodycount's is Jackson. Alrighty then. The problem is, Bodycount sucks. 2011, by the way, what happened? Well, besides the aiming reticle being on the lower third of the screen, so a majority of the top is entirely unused, it's so disorienting. There's barely any variety in the gameplay, there's only a small amount of weapons and abilities, and there's like 2 types of stages, the futuristic bases and then enemy mercenary bases that all function the same. The narrative is practically non-existent. You just hop from place to place shooting at things with definitely less interactivity than Black. I realize making video games is difficult, especially if you're gonna tout full destructive environments, but it's severely limited in body count. That, and you'll probably die a lot, or asset expire, because of the aggressive amount of enemies to deal with. Body count is a far cry from its spiritual predecessor, which is a shame. When Body Count came out, Bulletstorm and Bad Company 2 were already released. Both had way more you could do with shooting and the environments, and it just made it look worse. Not really anything else to say, except nobody should ever put your crosshairs here again. Looking at you, Halo. Now for the last section in our video. I thought it would be fun to highlight a bunch of really cool spiritual successor games that are generally good. Because you know what, video games are cool sometimes, and if Nintendo's not gonna make an F-Zero, and if Sony's not gonna make a Wipeout, I'm gonna play something like Redout or Fast Fusion. Sure, we haven't talked about Callisto Protocol following in the same footsteps as Dead Space, being supremely overhyped and under-delivering, and we don't have enough time to talk about the 4000 Earthbound and Chrono Trigger inspired games and spiritual successors, although Chained Echoes is pretty good. You're way less likely to hop into the futuristic racer dimension these days. Thankfully, Redout 2 and Fast Fusion delivered big time, the latter for a mere $14.99 at launch. Unless you're counting F-Zero 99, which I don't, we haven't had a new true F-Zero in over 20 years, and I will continue to yell about it until that changes. Redout and Fast Fusion are more leaning into the Wipeout side of things with bigger ships and tighter courses, and seeing just how good Fusion performs on the Switch 2's got me jonesing bad. Release Captain Falcon from his prison. Similarly, there's a lot of other games that don't have much to talk about, like, for example, City Skyline, where SimCity 2013 dropped the ball. 2015's City Skyline took their Cities in Motion titles, grabbed the full city ball, and went for it. For a while, this was the definitive simulation city building video game, and nothing came close. Not even the sequel. Not all city builders tread on SimCity, though. To be honest, I like mine with the side of insane trade route planning. Anno 1800 messed my life up, and Anno 117 looks like it'll hurt more. When it comes to building, if you're more in the mood for a zoo tycoon though, Frontier's Development's Planet Zoo has on unlock. After creating the Xbox One exclusive Zoo Tycoon, which was frankly not good, Frontier devs took the ideas and popped out Planet Coaster, Planet Zoo, Jurassic World Evolution 1 and 2, all fantastic spiritual successors for sim game franchises that are much harder to find these days. As I've said in the past, Jurassic World Evolution is amazing. It's dinosaurs. What you ever hear harder than that? You want a dab of Advance Wars? Wargroove 1 and 2 got you covered. They even nailed the presentation. Vanillaware's latest release, Unicorn Overlord, said, "Remember Ogre Battle 64? Gave us a healthy dose of actual Japanese-style fantasy RPG and presented a spiritual successor to a duology of games that don't get much love. Even if Tactics Ogre's the best one, this year's Clair Obscur Expedition 33 is a clear spiritual successor to the likes of Legend of Dragoon and Lost Odyssey in both combat systems and tone. They went, let's make a depressing RPG without many of those tropes, targeted the very core of my being, and released a game that Charlie Cox barely remembers doing voiceover for."
Okay. I don't know who that is. And I feel like a fraud.
Sleeping Dogs was a repurposed true crime game that Activision Blizzard decided to ixnay that was picked up by Square Enix. Basically, they took the idea, put more money into it, called it Sleeping Dogs, and gave us a spiritual successor that would have been the best in that entire series. The game sold well, it reviewed well, and I've said it before, I'll say it again, play Sleeping Dogs. It's great. Same deal with Moonlighter. In my opinion, the spiritual successor to Recettear. If there's one single video game you should play from this video, it's Japanese indie made Recettear. It's this fun, lighthearted story about a girl named Recette who goes into a big debt in order to run an item shop, so she's gotta work with the citizens to explore dungeons and make a few bucks. Capitalism ho! The battle cry of at least 300 elder millennials. Spanish-produced Moonlighter took that concept and revamped the heck out of it. The dungeons were larger with way more to do, the town had lots of upgrades, the shops and displays for customization had more oomph. This game could be tough too, you need
to escape the dungeons for sure, because your chances of making it to the end without dying and losing all of your sellables before upgrading yourself is low. There's no sign of another Reciteer, obviously. The developer Easy Game Station is a small doujin dev who hasn't released anything proper since the English release of Angel Express in 2016. But Moonlighter 2, The Endless Vault, is scheduled for later this year, so you know where I'll be, hoeing a little capitalism.
Hello, I like money.
And now for one final game, something I waited to play for a little too long. How about that spiritual successor to Mystical Ninja Goemon, Bakeru? Developed by Goodfeel, a company made of some ex-Konami devs who have done a decent amount of releases for Nintendo, Bakeru is the closest I think I'll get to another new Ganbare Goemon game in my lifetime. Goemon is a long-standing love of mine. The two Nintendo 64 releases are two of my favorites ever, and I feel like that whole franchise was just allergic to sales. Konami hasn't done anything with it since a Pachi slot game in 2011 and a cameo here and there. Goemon and Smash, Mii Fighters only. So Goodfeel and Spike Chunsoft teamed up to bring us Bakeru, which was actually developed by Tadanori Sukawaki and Etsunobu Ibisu, two of Goemon's lead creators, and what they came up with is a solid 3D platformer that I probably shouldn't have started right after finishing Astrobot. Whoops. However, I came back around recently on a trip overseas, played a bunch on my Steam Deck, and man, Bakeru sure is great. Rather than being based on a folklore hero, Bakeru is a Tanuki boy disguised as a human who does everything with taiko sticks. He drums on things, he smacks people, and they're assigned to the trigger buttons, so you feel like you're walloping things in front of you. You gain extra powers and forms to tackle situations differently, some way better than others, and every single level is its own totally unique thing. Some are auto-scrollers, some are races, some are old-school platforming levels, and all of them are bursting from the seams with personality. I'm glad I waited for this to get a PC port, because the frame rate situation on the original Switch left a lot to be desired, but going through all the regions of Japan, each with levels clearly curated to the culture in those regions, some of which are more absurd than others, harkens back to the goofy games that I fell in love with. Which means yes, we got giant robot fights. Playing through Bakeru is a joy through and through, and if you have any love for the Nintendo 64 era of Goemon games, it's absolutely worth playing. It doesn't quite have the scale of Mystical Ninja starring Goemon, as it's not open world, and you've only got one character to control. It does, however, maintain all of that charm through quirky dialogue, goofy character interactions, and the sheer uncanniness that franchise has. It's pretty chunky for a platformer too, 10 to 16 hours if you want to go for everything. I don't think Konami will ever let Goemon and a squad of friends out of containment, so I'm thankful that Goodfeel is trying something new. Maybe we'll get more Goemon in the future, but if not, at least Bakeru is a good time.
Konami.
So there you have it, a whole bunch of spiritual successors and sequels, and we're ending on a high note because why not? Goemon rules. I know I probably missed a whole bunch of these, especially with games that are so iconic they become genres, like Diablo and ARPGs, where it's like, which one's a clone, which one's inspired by, is this totally different? At a certain point, everything is so derivative, it doesn't really matter, but Yooka-Laylee, that's a spiritual successor. Let me know if I missed something down below, and if you liked today's video, check out the sponsor, Opera GX. You can even rewatch this video over there. You can support the channel directly over at Patreon or by picking up a shirt at the Pixel Empire. Do the channel things if you want, you know how this goes. This ain't your first YouTube video, but if it is, hi. Anywho, I'm gonna head out for now. It's nice to talk about some good stuff and body count. So I've been Austin, and I'll catch you guys next time. Thank you all so much for watching. Special Patreon shout out to Benna Oswald, Blackfoot Ferret, Blake Thomas, Cheeks, Cloric Fox, Chris Shelton, DX, Buster, Dylan Snyder, Fragile Traveler, Hey Quiggles, J Roos, Jackie G, Jacoby Fitzpatrick, Kevin Zanowski, Nocturnal Nix, Pierre, Platinum Rose, Pachabear, Rare Find It, and Vox. Thank you all so much for your generous support. July has gone by in a flash, and now we're almost at August, so ho no. Speaking of, August will be the month that I do another big 100% video, so hold on for that. I've been talking about it for like half a year now, but you know, life happens. Anyways, Donkey Kong Bonanza is like really good.